Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey friends, I'm Jill Castle, a pediatric dietitian, mom to 4 kids, and host of this podcast. I started this podcast in 2016 as a way to help families and healthcare professionals learn more about nutrition and feeding kids. My goal has always been to make nourishing your families easier through breaking down science into understandable concepts you can put into practice right away, and shedding light on and improving the emotional well-being of kids through feeding and food. You can always go deeper on my website, thenourishchild.com, where I have resources for children ages birth through teen. I'm always so grateful you're here, and I hope you enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nourish Child Podcast. Jill Castle here, your host, and welcome to summer. I'm recording this on June 2nd. This will air on the 8th. And I feel like I wait all year for the summer, and here it is. Typically, I take the summer off, or I do a highlight podcast series of episodes over the summer. But this summer, I'm going to do things a little bit differently. I'm going to focus on your questions. So as questions come in, and I highly encourage you to use my speakpipe.com resource, which is on my website. You can just go to the podcast page and you'll see a little orange audio button that will allow you to ask your question in your own voice. You don't have to give your name or anything, just ask your question, and that audio file will come to me and I'll be able to respond back with my answer. That's what we're going to do today. So that's thenourishchild.com/podcast, where you can find the SpeakPipe audio button, or you can go to speakpipe.com/the Nourish Child Podcast. And of course, you can always email me your questions, jill@jillcastle.com. And just as a little plug, if you don't know this, I do have a YouTube channel where I record videos around topics, right now particularly focused on toddlers. So there are lots of videos over there that you might find helpful that you can go and view as well. So today we're going to be talking about babies and spoon feeding. And this is a question that came in from a listener, and we'll go ahead and run that question right now, and I'll be right back to answer the question.
Hi, I am just coming on here to ask if you had any tips for my 14-month-old. I feed him breakfast, lunch, and dinner with snacks for solids, and then milk in between as well. And he does a lot of finger foods. He doesn't really do a lot of spoon feeding, so I love that he's so independent when it comes to eating, but the disadvantage is that a lot of the food will end up on the floor and he won't eat as much. But that's unfortunately all he does. He doesn't really like to do spoon feeding. So the reason why I'm asking is because my baby was born premature. He was born 34 and a half weeks. And, it's been a struggle, with him gaining weight throughout this journey, despite me offering whatever I could. So I guess I just wanted to come on here and ask for any advice or any tips that you guys may have had for this. I am just open to any tips at all. Thanks.
So I really appreciate this question because I think it can be very stressful when parents are trying to nourish their child and things aren't going as smoothly or as predictably as expected or wanted. So for this question, there's a couple of things that come to mind for me. And I wanted to break this down into 2 parts. 1, I want to talk about developmental readiness. And 2, I want to talk about growth and how to sort of encourage this little baby along the path of adventurous, but also sufficient and adequate eating and enjoyable eating. So let's talk about developmental readiness first. This little guy was born prematurely at around 34 and a half weeks. So corrected, he's around a year right now. So when we correct age, we basically account for prematurity, or the number of weeks that an infant came earlier than what we consider term. A term pregnancy is 38 to 40 weeks. So when babies come a little bit early, they can be delayed in sort of their developmental milestones. And I don't want to refer to delayed as a negative thing. They're just sort of catching up to a point at which they would be had they been born at term. So in this case, I feel like this little guy may still be catching up developmentally, and every child has sort of their unique path or time frame in which they progress along their developmental milestones. So in children who are born prematurely, whether it's, 24 weeks or in this case, 34 weeks, there can be a slight delay or a significant delay in their timeline. And so we have to keep that in mind as we think about this little guy and how he's doing with feeding. So I do think he may still be catching up. So when I think about him, I'm not thinking about him as a 14-month-old. I'm thinking about him more as like a 12-month-old. And that sets sort of the frame for what he's doing and what he's able to do. Now, most infants at a year are self-feeding. They've sort of, quote unquote, mastered the pincer grasp, the palmar grasp, the ability to bring food to the mouth with their hands and with a spoon. So sometimes kids just aren't that interested in a spoon, and that's okay. It's not a make or break deal. But I sense there's also a concern about weight gain and growth with this little guy. So I'm going to talk about that in a bit. But as it pertains to spoon feeding, I just want to say first off, if your baby skips the spoon and never uses a spoon, that's not a deal breaker. Babies can nourish themselves by feeding themselves with their hands. However, at some point, every child is going to learn how to use a spoon, because in our culture here, we eat with utensils. And if there's a disinterest, that doesn't mean that he'll never eat with a spoon. It just means that he needs experiences with spoons, and he needs to be able to see others eating with utensils. So I have a couple of tips here. Number one, just offer the spoon on the tray when it's time for meals. He can play with it. You can show him, model what it looks like to hold a spoon, to dip it into food, to bring it to his mouth. You can also model what it looks like to eat off of a spoon. Show him in exaggerated ways how to put the spoon into your mouth, how to wrap your lips around the spoon and pull food off of it into your mouth.
Kids change a lot. Their nutrition needs, eating habits, and food preferences do too. So much so, it can be hard to keep up. The Nourished Child, a website designed for parents who want more nutrition education, helps parents like you get crystal clear on raising good eaters. We've cracked the code on nourishing the whole child, whether you're raising a baby, a teen, or a child with health concerns. Our nutrition school and parent education programs help you get the inside scoop on food and nutrients, positive food parenting, and building self-motivated, autonomous kids who are good eaters. Visit thenourishedchild.com today.
Sometimes children need really explicit modeling of what it looks like to eat and what it looks like to use a utensil. So make sure you're doing that with this little one. And just, the offering of a spoon at mealtime without any pressure to use it allows him just to have that exposure and to get that spoon sort of associated with mealtime. The other thing you can do is preload his spoon. So put maybe a little bit of yogurt on the spoon. And again, model hand to mouth. Show him with your hand in your mouth how to eat yogurt off of that spoon. Sometimes infants aren't quite ready to dip spoons into food and bring it to their mouth. So preloading that spoon and making it really ready and placing the spoon in his hand can help him sort of take that next step. The other thing and last thing actually I will say about this is to just be really patient with your baby, because again, when children aren't developmentally ready or interested, and we as adults and parents try to force the issue or pressure that child to take that next step, it can actually turn into a negative for them. And we don't want that to happen. We want to always keep feeding, especially infants, very positive and pressure-free. So let's talk about the second point I wanted to address, and that's his growth. There sounds like there is a little bit of a concern about weight gain for this little guy. And I would just make sure you talk with your pediatrician about this. Validate your baby's growth with your pediatrician. Look at the growth chart, look at the trajectory. In this case, make sure the trajectory reflects his corrected age for prematurity. Because if you're plotting him as a 14-month-old, he is going to look small. So make sure that's being done correctly. And then if he is plugging along on his growth channel at an expected, predictable, usual pace, then he doesn't have a problem with weight gain, and let's not make a problem of it. So that's something I'd like you to talk with your pediatrician about. Secondly, make sure that the foods that you're offering at this age are still pretty high in fat. Fat is still very much needed at this time of growth and development. So high fat foods like avocado, full fat dairy. I just want to call out, a lot of families are starting to use plant-based milks at this stage in the game. And currently there really isn't a great plant-based offering for children between 1 and 2. Soy milk is a reasonable stand-in, but anything else is going to be short on either protein or fat. So it really is very important that the food offerings at this age are still pretty high in fat. So things, again, like if you're giving sauteing or soft cooking vegetables, it's okay to put a little sprinkle of olive oil on there. It's okay to use nut butters and cheese on toast strips, mashing avocado, full fat yogurts. You do not need to be concerned about adding fat to your baby's foods at this juncture. In fact, it's preferred because, again, that brain is developing and fat is one of the primary nutrients for that. And because your baby has such a small tummy at this time, as do all babies, fat is a great calorie source for all of the growth and development that's happening. So if you want more ideas and advice about starting solids and what types of foods that you need to be offering children at this stage of the game, you can go to Amazon and get my book, The Smart Mom's Guide to Starting Solids. I give lots of ideas and advice on foods and nutrients that are important at this stage of the game. And I know that you've already started solids and you're not in the early phase of this, but because your child is around 12 months, it might be a really good resource to refresh and frame the types of foods and the balance of food that you want to be offering moving forward. And to that end, I want to just say that developmentally, as a 12-month-old corrected age, I encourage you to bring your baby to the family table to eat the family foods that you're eating with your partner, if there are other children in the family. This is as much a nutrition piece of advice as it is a socializing and connection piece of advice for your baby. Babies learn a lot at the table, not only what to eat, but they learn how to eat by watching others model for them. And it's much more enjoyable than sitting in a high chair by yourself. So I encourage you to bring your little one to the family food table. And then last, just a reminder for little ones, because they fill up so fast, I always encourage families to offer food first at mealtime and liquids last. Because when we start with liquids, little ones can fill up quickly and then not have an appetite to eat solid food. So I hope that this is helpful advice for you. It's hard when your baby doesn't want to spoon feed or isn't interested in spoon feeding, but at this stage in the game, it's okay if he can self-feed and advance in that arena and just make that spoon available without pressure. I have other resources on my website, thenourishchild.com, that might help you as well. A few articles, self-feeding tips for babies and toddlers, and I'll link these articles in the show notes, which you can find over at thenourishchild.com. Hit the podcast tab and you'll see the latest podcast episode. This one is number 188. You'll be able to find that there, or you can just go to thenourishchild.com/188 and you will find all of these links. The second article is Baby Changes in Feeding, What to Expect. And that just goes through the developmental milestones. And you can really sort of read that article and see exactly where your child is at and know what's coming next. Another article, 4 mistakes that slow baby self-feeding. Again, just making sure you're not putting too much pressure, you're not interrupting your baby's meals with wiping their face or anything like that. And then another article, what is responsive feeding? I think that's important for all parents of little ones who are starting their food and eating journey to read. It's key to a successful feeding relationship with your child. And I've covered some of the important research in that area in that article. And then just last, if you do have an infant and you're starting the solid food journey, be sure to check out my book, The Smart Mom's Guide to Starting Solids. It's available on Amazon. I've linked it up in the show notes as well. That is it, folks. I hope you have a wonderful month of June. I will be back on the 22nd. And if you have a question, be sure to go to speakpipe.com/The Nourished Child podcast, or head over to thenourishedchild.com, hit the podcast tab, and you'll see the orange recording button on my site. And you can record your question there and I will answer them. That's it, folks. Have a great day and be sure to give that child in your life a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.